My name is Eliza Chen. I was never respected at home. That's something my mother reserved exclusively for my younger brother Ethan. From the time we were kids, he was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Even when we both worked at the same tech company, my mother acted like I was just passing time while Ethan was building a career. It didn't matter that I had worked my way up from intern to senior project manager over 8 years. In my mother's eyes, I was still just playing at having a job. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother, Diana Chen, always introduced Ethan as my son, the future executive, even when he was just starting in the mailroom. She'd beam with pride, her hand on his shoulder, while I stood to the side, invisible despite my promotions and accomplishments. He's just like his father, she'd say, born for business. As if the rest of us weren't in the room. And maybe in her mind we weren't. I was driven. I worked overtime. I earned 2 certifications while working full-time. Too serious, my mother would say. Not unkindly, but certainly not with admiration either. She said it with a sigh, like I was making life unnecessarily difficult for myself. When family friends visited, it was always Ethan's career trajectory she highlighted. I remember once when I was 29, Diana was hosting a dinner for her college roommates. I had just finished leading a successful product launch that had been mentioned in several industry publications. As I entered the dining room, she caught sight of me, nodded quickly, and said, "Eliza, could you check if we need more ice?" Later, she explained, "It's just that your job is so technical. No one wants to hear about project management metrics during dinner." My father, Michael Chen, never made me feel that way. He was quieter than Diana, more thoughtful. He'd worked as an architect for over 30 years, the kind of professional who stayed late perfecting details no client would ever notice, but that made the building stronger. He never missed a recital, never forgot a birthday, never dismissed my achievements. He didn't show off, but he noticed everything. When I received my first promotion to team lead, he took me out for dinner, just the 2 of us. Even when Diana commented, "It's just a stepping stone position. Everyone gets it eventually," Dad just smiled and raised his glass to me. "To excellence recognized," he said. He treated us equally. That's what I held on to. Even when Diana drove Ethan to interviews at prestigious firms while telling me, "You're better off taking the bus. It builds character." I reminded myself, Dad values my work. Even into adulthood, things didn't change much. Ethan still lived like success was his birthright, rather than something earned through persistence. He'd move between companies, always landing on his feet. When one position didn't work out, Diana always had an explanation ready. The company culture wasn't innovative enough for him, she'd say. Or his talents were being wasted there. Ethan smiled and networked his way through career challenges while I built my reputation methodically, reliably, and without fanfare. I stayed at Horizon Technologies when others jumped ship during the downturn. I led projects that weren't glamorous, but were essential. I paid my own way, saved for my own retirement, sent myself to conferences, and somehow at every family gathering, I was still the afterthought. Michael, though, always noticed my growth. He'd call midweek just to check in. "Tell me about your current project," he'd say, and actually listen to the answer. I never had to downplay my achievements with him or pretend my work was less demanding than it was. He gave his attention freely. That was the balance of our family. Diana and Ethan sharing industry gossip and name-dropping at every opportunity, and me and Dad discussing actual work and ideas in the quieter moments. I didn't realize how much I relied on that balance until it shifted. Dad had a minor stroke at 62. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough to frighten us all. The doctors recommended he reduce his hours, manage his stress more carefully. At first, it seemed manageable. He stepped back from client meetings, focused more on the design phase that he loved. I'd stop by his home office after work, and he'd show me his latest sketches. Nothing revolutionary, just elegant, thoughtful solutions to everyday problems. That was who he was. Always improving, always refining something, until it was just right. Then came the second stroke. more severe than the first. His speech was affected, and his right arm lost significant mobility. The recovery was frustrating for someone who expressed himself through drawing. Within months, he had to retire completely, earlier than planned, and with less financial security than he'd hoped for. He hated being sidelined. Diana hated it more. "He just sits at that drafting table," she complained once on the phone to Ethan, not realizing I had just walked into her kitchen. "All day, staring at sketches he can't complete." Ethan made sympathetic noises. "It's awkward having colleagues over. They don't know what to say to him anymore." "You could try asking him what he thinks," I suggested, setting down the groceries I'd brought. They both looked up, startled. Diana laughed a little too brightly. "We're not saying anything bad. It's just difficult seeing him struggle." But they weren't seeing him at all. Not really. They were treating him like an embarrassment. It started small. Diana scheduled more lunches out with friends. Ethan stopped bringing his industry contacts by the house. Then came the travel plans. I found a brochure on the kitchen counter. An exclusive tech conference in Singapore. Networking. Innovation panels. Luxury accommodations. "Looks interesting," I said, holding it up. Diana glanced over from her tablet. "Ethan's been invited to speak. I'm going as his +1. I frowned. "What about Dad?" Diana waved a hand dismissively. "You'll be here, won't you? You're always so good with the medical details." They didn't ask if I could rearrange my schedule. They didn't acknowledge that I was in the middle of leading the company's biggest product development cycle of the year. They just assumed. It kept happening. They traveled more. Industry events, weekend retreats, sometimes without even telling me in advance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd stop by after a long day to check on Dad and find him alone in his studio, trying to hold a stylus with fingers that wouldn't fully cooperate. One evening, I arrived just before the home health aide, Mrs. Porter, was scheduled to leave. She looked confused. "Is no one else going to be here tonight?" she asked. "No, just me," I said, setting down my laptop bag. "But I was told Miss Diana would be home by 6. Mr. Chen needs his evening medication and assistance with his therapy exercises." I called Diana. She didn't answer. Ethan texted back 3 hours later. "At dinner with potential investors. Can't you handle it?" That night, I helped Dad through his exercises myself, learned the medication schedule, made notes on what to watch for. Dad apologized repeatedly for the inconvenience. I said nothing. I couldn't bring myself to pretend it was acceptable. Eventually, I asked Diana and Ethan to create a shared calendar, to coordinate care days, to at least handle the insurance paperwork. Diana sighed dramatically. "I didn't spend 30 years raising a family to become a nurse at 60. I have my own life to live, Eliza." Ethan added, "You're so much better at this stuff. You're the one with the spreadsheets and the checklists and the follow-through. I just mess it up. I should have known something else was brewing." About 4 months after Dad's second stroke, I noticed some irregularities. His medical bills, which I had been helping him track, had payment confirmations I hadn't processed. When I asked Diana about it, she said, "I've taken over the financial side. Less for you to worry about." I didn't push, but it felt wrong. So I logged into the family's shared document drive one afternoon, using the credentials I'd set up years ago. Access denied. I called the insurance company. The representative informed me that the account permissions had changed. I wasn't listed as an authorized contact anymore. That same week, I overheard Diana on the phone with Ethan discussing a luxury apartment purchase. "Just transfer the down payment from Dad's investment account," she said. "We've already got the paperwork in place." "Investment account?" I asked later over dinner. She smiled thinly. "Your father's retirement fund. We have financial power of attorney now. It's just simpler this way." I set down my fork. "Since when?" 3 months ago. We needed it for medical decisions, investment management, that sort of thing." "You didn't consult me," Diana shrugged. "It was straightforward. No need for drama." Ethan, who had stopped by just for dessert, chimed in. "Don't overthink it, Eliza. We've got everything under control." But they didn't. Not really. They'd taken control quietly, legally and completely. And I hadn't seen it coming. By the second year after Dad's stroke, his world had contracted to just 3 rooms in the house. He spent most of his time in his adapted studio, where the light was good and his drafting table had been modified to accommodate his limited mobility. He'd lost interest in the architectural journals he once devoured. The garden he'd designed was neglected. He spoke less, but when he did, he still asked about my projects at work. I'd been promoted to Director of Special Projects, overseeing our most innovative and challenging initiatives. I'd arranged a flexible schedule, working remotely 2 days a week. Mrs. Porter could only cover 4 days, and Diana was too busy with community commitments to be reliable. Diana and Ethan had become increasingly absent. Ethan had landed a VP position at a competing firm and was networking around the clock, according to Diana. Diana herself had joined 3 boards and was constantly attending galas and fundraisers. I stopped expecting their help. One Wednesday, after a particularly challenging design review at work, I received a call from Mrs. Porter. "Your father fell this morning," she said, her voice steady but concerned. "Nothing broken, but the doctor wants to run some tests." I drove straight to the hospital, called my team to reschedule the afternoon's meetings, and prepared for a long wait. The neurologist asked to speak with me privately after the initial assessment. "Your father has shown some concerning symptoms beyond the fall," he said. "The imaging indicates several small vascular events, mini-strokes, that have been occurring over time. Additionally, there are signs of early vascular dementia." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Given his history, we need to adjust his care plan significantly. His needs will increase substantially in the coming months. That night, I emailed my VP and requested a shift to part-time status. There was no discussion at home. Diana didn't ask why I was suddenly present for breakfast. Ethan didn't notice I was no longer on evening calls. Dad noticed, though. One afternoon, while I was helping him organize his architectural reference books, a task that gave him purpose, he reached for my hand. "You've stepped back at work," he said. It wasn't a question. "Temporarily," I answered. "The team can manage." He shook his head slowly. "Not for me, Eliza. Don't sacrifice what you've built." But it wasn't a sacrifice I resented. It was the only choice that felt right. 2 weeks later, I was at Horizon Technologies for my quarterly in-person day when Jessica Winters, the CEO, stopped me in the hallway. "Eliza, do you have a moment? I'd like to discuss something." My stomach dropped. Part-time employees were often the first cut during restructuring, and rumors had been circulating. In her office, Jessica closed the door and sat across from me. "I've been reviewing the Special Projects Division's performance," she began. "Despite your reduced hours, your team has maintained exceptional results. In fact, efficiency metrics have improved." I nodded cautiously. "We've streamlined our processes. It was necessary." "It was brilliant," she corrected, "which is why I'm creating a new position. Executive Director of Innovation Strategy. Flexible hours, primarily remote, with compensation adjusted to reflect the executive level." I stared at her. "You're promoting me? Now?" "I'm recognizing talent and adaptability," she said. "The company needs your strategic thinking, whether that's happening in our building or from your home office while you manage other priorities." That evening, I found a handwritten note in Dad's sketchbook while helping him put away his supplies. It was addressed to me, the letter shaky but determined. "Eliza, I've watched you balance everything without complaint. You've earned every step forward. I've made some arrangements with my attorney. Not everything is as Diana believes. Take care of your future first. You've done more than enough for everyone else. Love, Dad." I didn't know what he meant, but I tucked the note away safely. That weekend, Jessica invited me to dinner to discuss the transition plan for my new role. "Bring someone if you'd like," she said. "We'll keep business to a minimum." I mentioned it to Diana in passing, not expecting her to care. To my surprise, she latched onto the information immediately. "Dinner with the CEO? Is this a date?" I laughed. "No, it's a business meeting. She's my boss." Diana's eyes narrowed calculatingly. "Bring her here first for drinks. Let me meet her." I declined immediately. "That's not appropriate. This is work-related." Diana persisted throughout the week, calling and texting suggestions for making a good impression. I ignored most of them. The night of the dinner arrived, and I was running late after helping Dad with an unexpected medication adjustment. I texted Jessica that I'd meet her at the restaurant. When I arrived, I spotted her at a corner table, already seated. But as I approached, I saw Diana sitting across from her, gesturing animatedly. My blood ran cold. I quickened my pace, catching the tail end of Diana's speech. Always been between jobs, you know. Never quite found her footing. We worry about her employment stability. That's why it's so nice of you to take her to dinner. Networking is exactly what she needs right now. Jessica's expression was carefully neutral. I see. That's not consistent with my understanding of Eliza's situation. I reached the table, mortified. Mom, what are you doing here? Diana turned, all innocent surprise. Eliza, I was just getting to know your friend Jessica. I happened to be meeting my book club next door and recognized her from the company website. Jessica stood, extending her hand to me. Eliza, glad you could make it. Your mother was just telling me some interesting things about your employment history. The way she emphasized interesting made it clear she wasn't buying Diana's version. Diana beamed, oblivious to the tension. I was explaining how you've struggled to find your place. It's so kind of Jessica to mentor you. Jessica's eyebrow raised slightly. Actually, Mrs. Chen, I wasn't aware that Eliza was struggling professionally. In fact, I just promoted her to executive director last week. She's one of our most valuable leaders. Diana's smile froze. Promoted? But she's been working part-time. She's barely at the office. Results matter more than location, Jessica replied smoothly. Eliza's strategic innovations have increased our market share by 11% this quarter alone. She turned to me. I've ordered a bottle of champagne. I think we have something to celebrate beyond your promotion. Diana stood awkwardly. I should join my book club. Lovely meeting you, Jessica. After she left, I sank into my chair. I am so sorry. I had no idea she would do that. Jessica waved it away. Family dynamics are complicated. But I'm curious. Why does your mother think you're unemployed when you're actually running our most successful division? I explained about Dad's health, Diana's dismissiveness, the years of being overshadowed by Ethan. Jessica listened attentively, then said, That explains your reluctance to discuss your achievements. But it doesn't explain why you've stayed silent about them. The question lingered as our dinner progressed from professional discussion to more personal conversation. By dessert, it was clear this wasn't just a business meeting anymore. Jessica asked about my interests outside work, shared stories about her own career journey, and suggested we continue the conversation over coffee another day. When she walked me to my car, she hesitated, then said, I'd like to see you again, Eliza. Not as your CEO. I started to object: workplace complications, family responsibilities, the impossibility of timing. She waited until I finished, then simply said, I'm not asking for promises, just coffee. Next week. I found myself saying yes. When I arrived home, Diana was waiting in the living room, her expression thunderous. You deliberately humiliated me, she accused. You let me believe you were struggling when apparently you've been hiding some executive position. I set down my keys. I never said I was struggling. You assumed that because it fit your narrative. Does Ethan know? Have you been keeping secrets from the entire family? Ethan never asked, I replied. Dad knows. He's always known. Diana scoffed. Your father barely knows what day it is anymore. The casual cruelty of her dismissal made something shift inside me. Dad has been more present and supportive with dementia than you've been at your best, I said quietly. And I'm not having this conversation tonight. I walked past her to check on Dad before bed. He was awake, sitting in his reading chair. Nice dinner? He asked, his speech slightly slurred, but his eyes sharp. Unexpected, I answered truthfully. Jessica is not what I expected outside the office. He smiled. Good, unexpected then. I nodded. She asked me out. For real, not for work. About time someone saw what I see, he said. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and I began dating cautiously. Coffee turned into dinners, which turned into weekend hikes and quiet evenings. I kept it separate from home, protective of this new happiness. At work, we maintained professional boundaries, though rumors inevitably circulated. My team's performance continued to excel, which was all that mattered professionally. At home, Dad's condition deteriorated more rapidly than expected. The neurologist explained that each small stroke caused cumulative damage. Diana spent even more time away, claiming the stress was too much for her. Ethan visited occasionally, uncomfortable with the physical changes in our father. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of medical appointments, I returned home to find Diana and Ethan in the kitchen with a stranger in an expensive suit. They fell silent when I entered. "Eliza," Diana said with forced brightness, "this is Warren Mills, our financial advisor. We were just discussing some adjustments to your father's estate planning." I set down my bag slowly. "What kind of adjustments?" Ethan jumped in. "Just practical stuff. The house needs significant modifications for Dad's care. We're looking at liquidating some assets." "Which assets?" I asked. Warren cleared his throat. "Primarily the commercial property your father invested in years ago. It's appreciated considerably." I knew the property, a small office building Dad had purchased early in his career. It had been his retirement safety net. "Does Dad know about this?" Diana waved dismissively. "Michael isn't in a position to manage these decisions anymore. That's why we have the power of attorney." Warren looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion when everyone has had time to review the documents." After he left, I confronted them. "You can't sell Dad's property without at least discussing it with him. He's not incapacitated." Diana's expression hardened. "The medical evaluation in the power of attorney documents says otherwise. His cognitive assessment scores put him below the threshold for financial decision-making." "When was this assessment done?" I demanded. "And why wasn't I informed?" Ethan shifted nervously. "It was during one of his hospital stays. You were at some work conference." The pieces clicked into place. The weekend I'd gone to present our new platform at the industry convention. The same weekend Diana had told Mrs. Porter I'd be home to help with Dad. "I want to see the documentation," I said. "All of it. The assessment, the power of attorney, everything." Diana's eyes narrowed. "That's not necessary. We're handling it." I stood my ground. "Either I see the documents or I request a new assessment with an independent doctor present." The threat worked. The next day, Ethan dropped off a folder of legal papers. As I reviewed them, my stomach knotted. The cognitive assessment had been conducted when Dad was on heavy pain medication after a fall. The power of attorney document gave Diana and Ethan complete control over all financial decisions with minimal oversight. Most concerning, there was a recent amendment redirecting the proceeds of any property sales to a, quote, family care trust that Diana and Ethan controlled as trustees. Dad's signature on this amendment looked shaky, different from his usual careful script. I took the documents to Jessica, who had practiced law before moving into corporate leadership. She reviewed them carefully. "This amendment is problematic," she said finally. "The signature could be challenged, and the timing, right after heavy medication, raises questions about capacity." "What should I do?" I asked. "First, get a current cognitive assessment from a neutral doctor. Then, depending on the results, you might need to petition for a review of the power of attorney." She hesitated. "This will create family conflict, Eliza. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Dad's note, about years of being sidelined, about Diana and Ethan's casual disregard. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." The next day, I arranged for a geriatric specialist to evaluate Dad. The results were mixed. He had significant impairment in some areas, but retained understanding of financial matters and personal preferences. Armed with this assessment, I consulted an elder law attorney Jessica recommended. He reviewed everything and outlined my options. "Your father's partial capacity complicates things," he explained. "But the amendment to the power of attorney is vulnerable. We can challenge it." I took a day off to think, sitting with Dad in his studio, while he attempted to sketch with his non-dominant hand. "I found your note," I said finally, "about arrangements with your attorney." He looked up, his gaze clearer than it had been in weeks. "James Kim," he said distinctly. "Call him." James Kim was Dad's longtime friend and attorney, not the lawyer Diana had been using. I found his contact information in Dad's old address book and called him that afternoon. James agreed to meet me the next day. His office was small but elegant, much like Dad's architectural style. "I've been waiting for your call," he said after I explained the situation. "Your father anticipated this scenario." He pulled out a thick file. 3 years ago, before his first stroke, Michael created a separate trust. It contains the majority of his retirement accounts and personal assets. I stared at him, uncomprehending. "But Diana and Ethan have been managing his accounts. They have power of attorney." James nodded. "They have power over the accounts they know about. Your father maintains separate accounts that weren't disclosed in his primary financial records. He funded them gradually over many years." "Why would he do that?" James looked at me steadily. He saw how Diana and Ethan operated. He loved them, but he wasn't blind to their priorities. He wanted to ensure his wishes were respected and that you were protected. He handed me another document. "This is the trust agreement. You're the primary beneficiary and successor trustee. It includes funds for your father's medical care, but it's structured to prevent Diana from redirecting those resources." I read through the document slowly, noting the careful provisions, the clear intentions. "Does Diana know about this?" And your father was explicit that she shouldn't be informed until necessary. I thought about the commercial property Diana and Ethan were planning to sell. "What about the office building?" James smiled slightly. "Check the property records. Your father transferred it to the trust 2 years ago. What Diana and Ethan are attempting to sell, they don't actually control." The realization of what Dad had done, the foresight, the protection he'd put in place long before his health failed, brought tears to my eyes. "When should we tell them?" James considered. "That depends on how quickly they're moving with their plans. If they're actively trying to sell property they don't own, we need to act soon." I decided to wait, to watch their next move, before revealing what I knew. I didn't have to wait long. The following week, Diana called a family meeting to discuss next steps for Dad's care. When I arrived, Warren Mills was there again, along with a woman introduced as a representative from an upscale assisted living facility. "We've made a decision," Diana announced without preamble. "Your father needs more care than this house can provide. We've found an excellent facility with memory care specialists." I kept my expression neutral. "And how will this be funded?" Ethan jumped in eagerly. "That's the good news. The commercial property sale is going through. The proceeds will cover several years of care." The assisted living representative smiled professionally. "We require a substantial deposit to secure a place. The family needs to move quickly as there's a waiting list." I looked at her directly. "Has anyone discussed this plan with my father?" Her smile faltered. "We understand there's a power of attorney in place due to diminished capacity." "I see. And the property sale? Is that proceeding smoothly?" I asked Warren. He shifted uncomfortably. "There have been some unexpected complications with the title search. We're working through them." "I bet you are," I thought. Aloud, I said, "I'd like to review all the options before any decisions are made." Diana's patience visibly thinned. "We've already made the decision, Eliza. The deposit is due next week. Your input isn't necessary." Something in me snapped. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, and now this final attempt to push Dad away. It was too much. "Actually," I said calmly, "my input is essential. As the successor trustee of the Michael Chen Living Trust, I have final authority over Dad's care decisions and the assets you're trying to access." The room went silent. Diana recovered first. "What nonsense is this? There's no trust. We have power of attorney." I placed James Kim's business card on the table. "I suggest you contact Dad's attorney. He can explain the legal situation more clearly than I can." Warren picked up the card, his expression changing as he recognized the name. James Kim is very reputable. If he's structured a trust, it would take precedence over a standard power of attorney for any assets it contains. Diana turned on me, her face flushed with anger. You went behind our backs? Conspired with your father when he wasn't thinking clearly? Dad created the trust 3 years ago, before his first stroke, I replied. And the commercial property was transferred to it 2 years ago. You can't sell what you don't control. Ethan looked bewildered. But why wouldn't Dad tell us about this? Perhaps, I said quietly, because he saw how you both treated his resources as entitlements rather than responsibilities. Diana stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We'll sort this out legally. After they left, I sat with Dad in his studio, explaining what had happened. He listened, nodding occasionally. Not wrong, he said simply when I finished. Not wrong to protect what matters. That night, Jessica called to check in. I told her everything. What happens now? She asked. Diana will fight it, I said. But legally, she doesn't have much ground. The trust is solid. And emotionally? For you, I thought about years of diminishment, of being the afterthought, of watching Diana and Ethan take and take while giving so little in return. It feels like confirmation that Dad saw me clearly even when they didn't. 2 days later, Diana and Ethan arrived unannounced, with their lawyer in tow. The confrontation was brief but intense. Their lawyer, after reviewing the trust documents, advised them they had limited options. The trust was created when Michael Chen was demonstrably of sound mind, he explained. Its provisions are clear and legally binding. Diana turned her anger directly on me. You manipulated him. Turned him against us while playing the devoted daughter. I didn't rise to the bait. Dad made his own decisions based on his observations over many years. I didn't even know about the trust until recently. Ethan, looking somewhat deflated, asked, So what happens to us? Where are we supposed to live if all his money goes to your trust? The question revealed how much they'd been counting on Dad's assets to support their lifestyles. The house remains in Diana's name, I explained, and Dad set aside funds for her basic expenses. But the commercial property and his investment accounts are dedicated primarily to his medical care, with provisions for my future that he determined. Diana's expression hardened. After everything I've done, all the sacrifices of being married to him, raising his children, this is how he repays me? The bitterness in her voice made me see her clearly for perhaps the first time. A woman who had viewed her family as investments that should yield returns rather than relationships to nurture. It was never about repayment, I said quietly. It was about protection. For him and for me. They left angry and resentful, making vague threats about contesting the trust. James assured me later that such challenges would likely fail given the timing and documentation. In the weeks that followed, our family fractured along familiar lines. Diana and Ethan drew closer together, united in their sense of being wronged. They visited Dad less frequently, their resentment palpable when they did. I continued managing his care, now with proper resources from the trust. Mrs. Porter's hours were extended, and I hired additional help for nights. Dad's conditions stabilized somewhat with the consistent care, though his lucid periods became less frequent. Jessica and I continued seeing each other, our relationship deepening despite the complicated circumstances. One evening, after a particularly good day with Dad where he'd been alert enough to offer advice on a design problem I'd brought home, Jessica suggested we take a short walk in the garden he'd designed years ago. As we strolled among plants that were finally receiving proper care again, she said, I've been thinking about us. About timing and priorities. My heart sank, assuming she was about to end things. Caring for Dad while maintaining my executive role left little time for a relationship. Instead, she took my hand. I've watched you balance impossible demands without losing your compassion or your integrity. You've shown me what real strength looks like. She paused by the Japanese maple Dad had planted when I graduated college. I'm not asking for more time than you can give. I'm asking to share the time you have. To help where I can. To be part of your life, however complicated. I looked at her, this brilliant woman who had seen value in me professionally and personally, when my own family couldn't. Are you sure? This situation isn't getting simpler anytime soon. She smiled. I'm not interested in simple. I'm interested in you. We were interrupted by Mrs. Porter calling from the house. Eliza, your father is asking for you. He's quite insistent. I found Dad in his studio, more alert than he'd been in weeks. He gestured to his drafting table where a folder lay open. For you, he said. Finished it. Inside was a set of architectural drawings. Simple but elegant plans for a small house with a studio space and gardens similar to his own. On the cover page, he'd managed to write in his shaky hand, "For Eliza and Jay, build something new." I showed Jessica the plans later that evening. He's giving us his blessing, I explained, in the way that matters most to him, through creating something. She traced the lines of the drawing gently. It's beautiful. And very thoughtful. 3 months later, Dad had another major stroke. This time, the damage was extensive. The doctors were honest about his prognosis. Days or weeks, not months. I took a leave of absence from work, grateful for the security the trust provided. Diana and Ethan visited briefly, their interactions stiff and formal. Whatever genuine grief they felt was wrapped in layers of resentment and regret. Dad passed peacefully on a Thursday morning with me holding his hand. There was no dramatic final speech, no last-minute reconciliation with Diana. Just a gentle squeeze of my fingers and a final exhale. I called the hospice nurse, then Jessica, then finally Diana and Ethan. Diana answered on the third ring. We're at a networking breakfast, she said when I told her. We'll come by this afternoon. There was no urgency in her voice, no recognition that some thresholds can't be crossed twice. I handled the arrangements as Dad would have wanted. Simple, dignified, without fanfare. The service was small, attended mostly by his former colleagues and a few longtime friends. Diana wore an expensive black dress and accepted condolences with practiced grace. Ethan worked the room like a business function, exchanging cards with potential contacts. I stood with Jessica, speaking honestly about the complicated, thoughtful man my father had been. After the service, Diana approached me. We need to discuss the house, she said without preamble. Now that your father is gone, I assume the trust dissolves. I shook my head. The trust continues. Its terms are clear about the distribution of assets. Which means what, exactly? She asked sharply. The house remains yours, as it always was, I explained. Dad's personal effects will be distributed according to his wishes. The commercial property remains in trust, with income dedicated to specific purposes he outlined. And let me guess, you benefit most from these specific purposes, Diana said bitterly. Actually, I said, the primary beneficiary is a scholarship fund for students pursuing sustainable architecture, Dad's passion project. I receive some resources, yes, but not what you're imagining. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. Then what was the point of all this secrecy? Why create a trust at all? To ensure his wishes were respected, I said simply. To protect what mattered to him. 2 weeks after the funeral, I returned to work full-time, though still primarily remote. Jessica and I began discussing the land Dad's trust had set aside, a small parcel near the city where his house plans could become reality. Diana and Ethan drifted further from my life. Occasional text messages our only connection. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ethan's latest job hadn't worked out as planned. Diana had to scale back her social commitments as financial reality set in. The house needed repairs they couldn't afford. The lifestyle they'd been anticipating wasn't materializing. 6 months after Dad's passing, Diana called unexpectedly. Her voice lacked its usual confidence. The roof is leaking, she said without greeting. The estimate is more than I can manage right now. I waited, sensing there was more. I thought perhaps the trust. Since it was your father's house for so many years, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of history between us. I'll have James review the trust provisions, I said finally. There may be allowances for structural maintenance of the family home. Thank you, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. Eliza, I may not have always appreciated your contributions. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing to one I'd ever heard from her. I didn't push for more. Jessica and I moved forward with the house plans, breaking ground that spring. We married in a small ceremony on the property, standing where the garden would eventually grow. Dad's presence was felt in every careful detail of the design, the way the morning light fell across the kitchen counter, the built-in bookshelves in the study, the studio space with northern exposure. I kept my promise about the roof. James found a provision allowing for maintenance of the family home under certain conditions. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful foresight that characterized my father's planning. Diana accepted the help without much grace but with obvious relief. Over time, our relationship shifted to something more cordial, if never truly warm. Ethan eventually found stable employment at a smaller firm, where his networking skills were valued appropriately. He sometimes asked for advice about industry challenges, a tacit acknowledgement that perhaps I knew something worthwhile after all. One year after Dad's passing, I was in my office at Horizon Technologies, when Jessica knocked on my door, her expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I have news," she said, closing the door behind her. My mind raced through possibilities. Corporate restructuring, health concerns, family issues. "I've been approached by the board about the CEO position at our European division," she said. "It would mean relocating to London for at least 3 years." My heart sank. Long-distance relationships rarely survived such separations, and we'd only just found our rhythm together. "That's an incredible opportunity," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "When would you need to decide?" Jessica sat across from me, taking my hands in hers. "I've already decided." I turned it down. I stared at her. "You what? Why would you do that?" "Because some opportunities come at too high a cost," she said simply. "I built something here that matters, both professionally and personally. London will always be there. What we have might not be if I leave now." I shook my head, conflicted. "I don't want to be the reason you limit your career." "That's exactly what I fought against in my own family." Jessica laughed softly. "This isn't limitation, Eliza. It's choice. There's a profound difference." She squeezed my hands. "Besides, I had a better idea. One that keeps us together and advances both our careers." She outlined her counterproposal to the board, expanding Horizon's innovation division into international markets, with me leading the initiative and reporting directly to her. "It means more responsibility for both of us," she explained. "More travel, certainly, but together rather than apart. And it builds on what you've already proven you can do extraordinarily well." The plan was approved 2 weeks later. My first assignment was establishing our European Innovation Hub, a task that would require 6 weeks in London. "Will you be okay with this much travel?" Jessica asked as we packed. "You've been so rooted here since your father passed." I considered the question carefully. Dad always said good architecture is about creating spaces that support the lives people actually want to live, not forcing people to adapt to spaces that don't work. I think the same is true for careers. "And this supports the life you want? Building something meaningful with someone who sees me clearly?" "Yes." The night before our departure, Diana called. Our conversations had become monthly check-ins, brief but civil. This time, her tone was different. "I found some of your father's old portfolios," she said. "Early projects from when we first met. I thought you might want them for your new house." The offer surprised me. These were personal mementos she'd never shown interest in sharing before. "That's very thoughtful," I said cautiously. "I'd love to have them." "I could drop them by tomorrow," she suggested, then paused. "Your assistant mentioned you're leaving for Europe." "For 6 weeks," I confirmed. "We're expanding the innovation division internationally." There was a long silence. "Your father would have been proud," she said finally. "He always believed you would do important things." The acknowledgement, so long withheld, hit me harder than I expected. "Thank you," I managed. "That means a lot." "I wasn't always," she began, then stopped. I didn't always see what he saw in you. It wasn't a full apology or recognition of years of dismissal, but it was something, a crack in the wall between us. I'm learning to see things differently too, I offered. We arranged for her to drop off the portfolios with our house sitter while we were away. It was a small bridge, tentatively extended from both sides. London was exhilarating and exhausting. Meetings with potential partners, scouting office locations, building a team from scratch. Jessica and I worked in seamless tandem, her strategic vision complementing my execution skills. In the evenings, we explored the city together, finding small moments of adventure amid the intense work schedule. 3 weeks into our trip, I received an unexpected email from Ethan. The subject line read simply, "Opportunity?" The message was brief. "A position is opening in our international division, VP of Strategic Innovation. The description sounds like it was written for you. I know things between us are complicated, but you'd be perfect for this. Let me know if you want me to put in a word." I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation or something else? I showed the email to Jessica that evening. "It's an interesting offer," she said neutrally. "How do you feel about it?" "Confused," I admitted. Part of me wonders if this is Ethan's way of trying to repair our relationship. Another part wonders if Diana put him up to it for some reason. "Would you consider it? Working with Ethan?" I thought about it carefully. A year ago, absolutely not. Now, I'm not sure. Things have shifted. I crafted a polite response, thanking Ethan for thinking of me but explaining I was committed to my current expansion project. His reply came the next morning. "Completely understand. The offer stands if things change. I respect what you've built, Eliza." I should have said that years ago. The acknowledgement from both Diana and Ethan within weeks of each other felt significant, as if some invisible barrier had finally begun to crumble. Our London project progressed ahead of schedule. By week 5, we'd secured office space, hired key personnel, and established partnerships with local tech incubators. Jessica and I decided to take a 3-day weekend before our final week of meetings. We rented a car and drove to the Cotswolds, staying in a small stone cottage with a garden that reminded me of Dad's designs. Thoughtful, harmonious with its surroundings, quietly beautiful. On our last evening there, sitting by the fireplace, with rain pattering against the windows, Jessica handed me a small box. "I've been waiting for the right moment," she said. "This feels like it." Inside was a delicate silver pendant, an architect's compass, intricately detailed. "It was your father's," she explained. "I found it among the things Diana sent over. There was a note with it, saying he'd want you to have it." I turned it over in my hands, recognizing the precision tool he'd used throughout his career. "How did you get this? We've been away." I asked our house sitter to send photos of everything Diana dropped off. When I saw this, I arranged to have it shipped here. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, both Diana's and Jessica's, brought unexpected tears. "He carried this everywhere," I said quietly. "It was his good luck charm on every project." Jessica fastened it around my neck. "Now it's yours, for building whatever comes next." We returned to London renewed, completing our remaining tasks with focused efficiency. The night before our flight home, I received a text from Diana. "Safe travels. The house will be waiting." It was such a simple message, yet it acknowledged what had always been true, that Dad's house, the physical space Diana had claimed but never fully inhabited, had always held more meaning for me than for her. It was an olive branch, awkwardly extended but genuine. The European Innovation Hub launched successfully 3 months later. I traveled between continents regularly, building teams that reflected the collaborative approach Jessica and I had developed. Horizon's stock price climbed steadily as our international strategy paid dividends. At home, our house was finally complete. We moved in on the anniversary of Dad's passing, a deliberate choice to transform the day from one of loss to one of new beginnings. Diana came to the housewarming, her first visit to the property. She walked through the room slowly, touching door frames, studying angles. "It feels like him," she said finally. "Not a copy, but an evolution." It was perhaps the most insightful thing she'd ever said about Dad's work. That was the goal, I acknowledged. To honor his vision while creating something that works for us. She nodded, then hesitated. I never understood why he connected with you so much more easily than with me or Ethan. The question hung between us, loaded with years of resentment and misunderstanding. I don't think it was about ease, I said carefully. I think it was about seeing. Dad noticed things. Subtle details, small efforts, quiet persistence. He valued what others overlooked. And I overlooked you, Diana said, the admission clearly difficult. For most of your life. I didn't deny it. There was no point in pretending away decades of dismissal. Yes, you did. She looked away, out toward the garden where Dad's influence was most evident. I'm trying to see differently now. It's not easy to realize how wrong your perspective has been. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was an acknowledgement of the truth. For Diana, that represented significant growth. Our relationship would never be close, but it was evolving into something more honest. Ethan visited separately, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and awkward goodwill. He toured the house with genuine interest, asking questions about design choices and materials. You've created something remarkable here, he said as we sat on the back porch, both with the house and at Horizon. Thank you, I said, still finding it strange to receive recognition from him. Your company's doing well too, from what I hear. He nodded. We've stabilized. My new role focuses on client relationships rather than technical innovation. Turns out I'm better at maintaining connections than creating new systems. The self-awareness surprised me. That's an important realization. Dad tried to tell me that years ago, he admitted. I wasn't ready to hear it then. We sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset color the garden Dad had designed in spirit, if not in person. Do you think he knew? Ethan asked suddenly. How things would play out between all of us? I considered the question carefully. I think he understood people's essential natures better than we realized. He saw patterns and made provisions accordingly. He protected you? Ethan said, not accusingly but thoughtfully, because he knew Deanna and I wouldn't. He protected what mattered to him, I corrected gently, including his vision for how his resources should be used. The scholarship fund was always his priority. Ethan nodded slowly. I've been thinking about applying for a position on the scholarship committee, to stay connected to his legacy somehow. The request surprised me. I think that could be arranged. You've always had good instincts about people, even if we've disagreed on other things. It was a small concession from both of us, an acknowledgement that paths forward might exist if we were willing to see each other more clearly. 6 months after we moved into the new house, Jessica was formally named CEO of Horizon Technologies when her predecessor announced his retirement. The board's vote was unanimous, a recognition of her vision in expanding the company internationally while maintaining its innovative edge. I was promoted to Global Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to the board rather than to Jessica to maintain appropriate corporate governance. The evening of the announcement, we celebrated quietly at home, rather than attending the lavish party the company had organized. Are you disappointed to miss the festivities? I asked as we sat in Dad's garden, now flourishing under our care. Jessica shook her head. I've attended enough corporate parties to last a lifetime. This feels more meaningful. She gestured to the space around us. Building something that lasts, whether it's a company, a house, or a relationship, happens in these quiet moments, not in the spotlight. Her words reminded me of Dad, who had always focused on creating rather than displaying. He would have liked you, I said, not for the first time, and respected your work. High praise, she smiled. From both of you. The following week, I received an unexpected call from Mrs. Porter, Dad's former care nurse, who had stayed loosely in touch after his passing. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, she began. I'm working with a new patient now, a retired architect who's struggling with early-stage dementia. His family is having difficulty adjusting. I understood immediately why she had called. They're pulling away? The children are. The wife is trying, but she's overwhelmed. They don't understand how to connect with him as he changes. I thought about the years with Dad, the challenges and unexpected gifts of that difficult time. Would it help if I spoke with them? I offered. Not as an expert, just as someone who's walked that road. Mrs. Porter's relief was audible. That's exactly what I was hoping you might consider. The meeting was arranged for the following weekend, an informal lunch with Catherine Williams, the wife of Mrs. Burkay, Porter's new patient. I expected someone fragile, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Instead, Catherine was composed and direct, her questions practical rather than emotional. Mrs. Porter says you managed your father's care while maintaining your career. How was that possible? We talked for hours about practical arrangements, emotional boundaries, and finding moments of connection, even as communication became more difficult. The hardest part, I told her, is watching others pull away when they're needed most. Catherine nodded, understanding immediately. Our children visit less frequently now. They say it's too painful to see their father changing. It is painful, I acknowledged. But there are still moments of profound connection possible. Different than before, but valuable. As our conversation wound down, Catherine asked the question that clearly weighed most heavily. How did you know what to do when there were so many conflicting opinions and priorities? I thought about the years of navigating between Dad's needs, Diana's expectations, and my own life. I learned to trust the quietest voice in the room, my father's, even when it became nearly silent, and my own, which I'd been taught to doubt. Catherine considered this, then said, Would you be willing to speak with my children? They might listen to someone who's been through this. The request evolved into a small support group that met monthly in our garden, families navigating the complex terrain of cognitive decline while trying to maintain careers and relationships. I never positioned myself as an expert, only as someone who had made mistakes, learned difficult lessons, and found unexpected grace in the process. Word spread, and the group grew. Jessica supported the initiative wholeheartedly, adjusting her schedule to help host when needed. You've created something important here, she observed after one particularly emotional session. Something your father would be proud of. I looked around at the garden he had designed in spirit, at the house built from his plans, at the life I'd constructed from the foundation he'd provided. I think he knew what we could build, I said. He just made sure we had the right tools. Diana attended one session, sitting quietly at the back. Afterward, she approached hesitantly. The things you said about maintaining connection even when someone can't remember. I wish I'd understood that with your father. The admission cost her pride, I knew. It's never too late to apply those lessons elsewhere, I offered. She nodded, something shifting in her expression. I'm trying. With you. With the scholarship committee. It's not easy to change at my age. Growth isn't supposed to be easy, I said, echoing words Dad had often used when facing design challenges. It's supposed to be worth it. Ethan became more involved with the scholarship fund, bringing valuable connections that expanded its reach. Our professional lives remained separate but occasionally intersected at industry events. At one such conference, I spotted him deep in conversation with Jessica across the room. They noticed me watching and waved me over. Ethan has an interesting proposal, Jessica explained. A joint initiative between Horizon and his firm to support architectural technology for assisted living spaces. The idea combined Dad's architectural passion with practical innovation, exactly the kind of project that would have excited him. I'd like to tie it to the scholarship fund, Ethan added. Create internship opportunities for the students Dad's trust supports. We developed the initiative together over the next several months, each bringing different strengths to the collaboration. Diana even contributed, reviewing designs with an eye for practical needs of caregivers. Expertise gained through her belated involvement with Catherine's support group. The project launched on what would have been Dad's 70th birthday. Standing at the podium during the announcement, I looked out at the unlikely assemblage. Jessica beside me, Diana and Ethan in the front row, Catherine and members of our support group scattered throughout the audience. My father believed in building things that last, I said. Not monuments to ego, but spaces that support real human needs and relationships. I touched the architect's compass that still hung around my neck. He taught me that the most important blueprints aren't just for buildings, but for lives well lived. Afterward, Diana approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. Your father would have been proud today. Not just of the project, but of you, who you've become despite everything. The acknowledgement, so long withheld, felt like the closing of a circle. I learned from him, I said simply, and from my own experiences. Even the difficult ones. Diana nodded, understanding the reference to our complicated history. I'm trying to learn too. Better late than never, I suppose. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. Those exist more in stories than in real life. But it was an honest moment between two people who had finally begun to see each other clearly. Later that evening, Jessica and I walked through Dad's garden, now in full bloom with plants he had selected in spirit years before. You've honored him well, she said, squeezing my hand, in all the ways that matter. I thought about the journey. From being the invisible daughter to creating something visible and meaningful from the foundation Dad had provided. He gave me the tools, I said, but we built this together, you and I. Jessica smiled. That's the thing about good foundations. They support whatever you're ready to create next. I touched the compass pendant, thinking of Dad's precise, careful work and the legacy that had evolved from it. Some people inherit money. Others inherit wisdom. I received both, but the latter proved infinitely more valuable. In the quiet garden my father had designed in spirit, standing with the woman who saw me clearly from the beginning, I finally understood what Dad had been trying to tell me all along. The greatest inheritance isn't what's left to you, it's what you build with what you've been given. And sometimes, the people who see you most clearly aren't the ones you're born to, but the ones who choose to really look. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, this story is for you. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need anyone's permission to build something beautiful from whatever foundation you've been given. Just keep going. The right people will see you, even if they weren't the ones you expected. The following spring, Horizon Technologies faced its biggest challenge yet. A competitor launched a similar international expansion, directly targeting our new European markets. The board called an emergency meeting on a Saturday morning, the kind that usually signals panic. Jessica remained calm as the board members voiced their concerns. They've undercut our pricing by 15%, one director noted. And they're poaching our talent with inflated offers, added another. When all the fears had been aired, Jessica turned to me. Eliza, you built our European division. What's your assessment? Every eye in the boardroom turned to me. In the past, such scrutiny would have made me shrink, trained by years of Diana's dismissal to question my own judgment. Instead, I felt a steady confidence. Not arrogance, but the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your own capabilities. They're reacting, not innovating, I said clearly. Their pricing strategy is unsustainable given their cost structure, and talent acquired purely through money rarely stays long-term. Our foundation is stronger. I laid out a measured response plan, not a defensive retreat, but a thoughtful reinforcement of our key advantages. Jessica built on my framework, and by meeting's end, the board's panic had transformed into strategic resolve. As we walked to the parking garage afterward, Jessica smiled. That was masterful. You've always had that strategic clarity, but now you own it completely. I used to worry about speaking up, I admitted. About taking up space in rooms like that. What changed? She asked, though I suspected she already knew. I stopped measuring my worth through other people's expectations, I replied, especially those who never really saw me. That evening, as we prepared dinner in our kitchen, the one built according to Dad's design principles, Jessica brought up something unexpected. I've been thinking about children, she said casually, chopping vegetables with precise movements. About us having a family. The knife in my hand paused mid-slice. That's not something we've discussed before. She continued her methodical chopping. I know. It wasn't something I considered seriously until recently. Watching you with the support group families, seeing how you translate your experience with your father into compassion for others, it made me think about what kind of parent you would be. I resumed cutting, processing the idea. And what kind of parent would you be? I asked, genuinely curious. Jessica had never mentioned children in her life plan. Probably too structured at first, she admitted with a self-aware smile. But willing to learn. Open to being changed by the experience. Like you were changed by us? She nodded. Exactly. Before you, my life was orderly but limited. You showed me that meaningful growth often comes through embracing complications rather than avoiding them. We didn't make any decisions that night, but the conversation opened a door neither of us had expected to walk through. It reminded me that life's most significant opportunities often arrive unannounced, requiring us to reimagine the blueprints we've drawn for ourselves. The following week, I received an email from James Kim, Dad's attorney. I've been going through your father's final papers, he wrote. There's something he wanted you to have when the time felt right. His words, not mine. It's been in my safekeeping, but I believe now might be that time. When I met with James, he handed me a leather portfolio I recognized immediately. Dad's special project case, the one he'd used only for his most meaningful work. Inside was a collection of hand-drawn sketches for a children's learning center, a project he'd apparently been developing privately for years. Accompanying the designs was a letter, dated just weeks before his first stroke. Eliza, these drawings represent what I consider my most important, unrealized work. Not because of architectural significance, but because of purpose. The center is designed to support children who learn differently, who see the world through unique perspectives. Children like you once were thoughtful, observant, processing deeply while others rushed forward. I never had the opportunity to build this. Perhaps it wasn't meant for me to complete. The property adjacent to your new home would be ideal. I've included the parcel information. The trust contains funds designated for this purpose, should you choose to pursue it. No pressure, no expectations. Just an opportunity to build something meaningful, if and when the time feels right. With love and complete confidence in whatever you decide, Dad. The precision of his foresight stunned me. Not just the designs themselves, but his understanding that someday I might be ready for such a project. That evening, I shared everything with Jessica, spreading the sketches across our dining table. These are extraordinary, she said, studying the thoughtful details. Spaces designed for both quiet reflection and collaborative learning. Natural light carefully considered. Acoustics planned to minimize sensory overload. Your father understood neurodiversity long before it became widely recognized. He understood me, I said quietly, and translated that understanding into physical space. Jessica looked up. Is this something you want to pursue? It would be a significant undertaking alongside your role at Horizon. I traced the lines of the main entrance, welcoming yet protective, just as Dad had always been for me. I think it might be. Not immediately, but yes. She nodded. It feels like perfect timing, considering our conversation about family. How so? Building a place that honors different ways of learning and being in the world, it aligns with the kind of parents I think we would want to be. The connection hadn't occurred to me, but once she said it, the symmetry was undeniable. Over the next several months, we explored both possibilities in parallel, consulting with adoption agencies and surrogacy experts, while also meeting with architects who could help realize Dad's vision for the Learning Center. Both paths required planning, patience, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. Diana's reaction to the Learning Center plans surprised me. When I mentioned the project during one of our now regular coffee meetings, I expected polite disinterest. Instead, she asked to see the designs. Michael never showed these to me, she said, studying the sketches with uncharacteristic focus. It was a personal project, I explained. Something he developed on his own. Diana nodded slowly. It's very... him. Thoughtful, seeing needs others missed. She hesitated, then added, like he saw yours when I didn't. The acknowledgement, offered without prompting, represented how far we'd come. Would you want to be involved? I asked, surprising myself with the invitation. With the center? Diana looked equally surprised. What could I possibly contribute? You were an educator before you married Dad, I reminded her. You have experience, I don't. It was a part of her history she rarely mentioned. The teaching career she'd abandoned to support Dad's architectural practice and raise a family. That was a lifetime ago, she said dismissively, but I noticed she continued studying the designs with interest. Just think about it, I suggested. The perspective of someone with classroom experience would be valuable. She didn't commit, but she didn't refuse either. Progress by our complicated standards. Ethan's involvement came more naturally. His networking skills proved invaluable in connecting us with potential donors and community partners. I never really understood what Dad saw in you until now, he said one evening as we reviewed fundraising strategies. That sounded terrible, didn't it? I laughed. A little. But I know what you mean. He smiled ruefully. You approach projects the way he did, seeing the whole structure while also caring about the smallest details. I never had that kind of vision. We have different strengths, I acknowledged, which is why this partnership works. And it did work, surprisingly well. Our professional relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have imagined in those tense days after Dad's passing. As the Learning Center progressed from concept to construction, Jessica and I received news that changed everything. After months of working with an adoption agency, we were matched with a 6-year-old girl named May. Her file described her as thoughtful, artistic, and sometimes overlooked in group settings, words that resonated deeply with my own childhood experience. She reminds me of you, Jessica said as we reviewed the information. Quiet strength. Observing everything. The timing was challenging. The Learning Center groundbreaking was scheduled for the same month we would potentially travel to meet May. We can postpone the ceremony, I suggested. Jessica shook her head. No, both are priorities. We'll make it work. And somehow, we did. The construction team broke ground while we were overseas, with Ethan standing in to represent the family. Diana, to everyone's surprise, had agreed to serve as an educational consultant for the project. Meeting May was like encountering a younger reflection of myself, a child who approached the world carefully, who noticed details others missed, who expressed herself through art rather than words. Our first interactions were quiet, respectful of her boundaries while establishing trust. She's an old soul, our adoption coordinator observed. She needs parents who understand that not all children communicate the same way. Jessica sat on the floor beside May, admiring the intricate drawing the child was creating. This is beautiful, she said. You've captured the light perfectly. May looked up, studying Jessica's face for sincerity, before offering a small smile. I recognized that cautious evaluation, the assessment of whether an adult truly sees you or is merely performing interest. With Jessica, May seemed to sense genuine appreciation. The adoption process would take months to complete, but our connection was immediate and undeniable. Returning home without her was difficult, but necessary, as we completed the required procedures and prepared our home for her arrival. The day we received confirmation that the adoption was proceeding to the next stage coincided with a major milestone at the Learning Center, the completion of the main structure. I stood at the building site, phone still in hand from receiving the news, and felt the convergence of everything Dad had set in motion years ago. His designs were taking physical form. His belief in my capabilities had translated into a career that allowed me to fund this project. His understanding of different ways of being in the world had somehow led us to May. It wasn't mystical thinking to recognize the patterns. It was acknowledging the power of one person's vision extending beyond their lifetime. He would be amazed by what you've created, Diana said, joining me at the site. She had been visiting regularly, offering increasingly valuable input on the educational spaces. Not just this building. Everything. Coming from Diana, this was profound recognition. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. She nodded, then added, I've been asked to develop the curriculum for the center's after-school program. I wanted to discuss it with you before accepting. The request caught me off guard. Not that she'd been asked, but that she was seeking my approval. You'd be excellent at that, I said truthfully. Your experience would be invaluable. Something in her expression shifted, a hint of pride, perhaps, at being valued for her professional capabilities rather than her social connections. I'd like to name one of the programs after your father, she said, if that seems appropriate. I think he would be honored, I replied, especially coming from you. It wasn't complete reconciliation. Too much history lay between us for that. But it was a genuine connection, built on shared purpose rather than obligation. That evening, I shared both developments with Jessica, the adoption progress and Diana's curriculum proposal. Your family is healing, she observed. Not in dramatic ways, but in the quiet, meaningful ones that actually last. I never expected that, I admitted. For years, I just wanted acknowledgement. Now we're building something together that's bigger than our differences. Jessica smiled. That's the thing about strong foundations. They can support structures you never imagined at the beginning. 3 months later, as the Learning Center neared completion, we traveled again to finalize May's adoption. This time, we would bring her home. The night before our meeting, I found myself awake at 3 a.m., wrestling with unexpected doubts. Not about May. Our connection with her felt unquestionably right, but about my own readiness for parenthood. Jessica found me sitting on the hotel balcony, staring at the city lights. Can't sleep? She asked, joining me. I shook my head. I keep thinking about patterns, about not repeating Diana's mistakes. Jessica was quiet for a moment. You're not Diana. You never have been. But parenting changes people. What if I don't see May clearly? What if I miss what makes her special because it doesn't match my expectations? Jessica took my hand. The fact that you're asking these questions already sets you apart. You know what it feels like to be unseen. That awareness is a kind of protection, for both you and May. I wasn't entirely convinced. Diana didn't start out intending to favor Ethan. It evolved over time. True, but you have something Diana never did. What's that? Someone to reflect with. Someone who will tell you the truth, even when it's difficult. You have me. The simple certainty in her voice steadied me. She was right. Our partnership provided a balance that had been missing in my parents' relationship. The next morning, May joined our family officially. The quiet ceremony at the adoption agency was followed by a celebratory lunch where she cautiously tried each new food, observing our reactions before forming her own opinions. She watches everything, Jessica whispered. Just like you. Bringing May home required adjustments to our schedules, our living spaces, our expectations. The house Dad had designed proved adaptable, with the studio easily converted into a creative space for May's artistic explorations. She moved through our home carefully at first, learning its rhythms and boundaries. This was designed by my father, I explained one day as she studied the built-in reading nook in the living room. Your grandfather. May considered this. He made spaces for quiet? The perceptiveness of her question struck me. Yes, exactly that. He understood that some people need quiet to think their best thoughts. She nodded solemnly. Like me. Like us, I corrected gently. The recognition that passed between us in that moment was profound. A generational understanding that transcended biology. 1 month after May's arrival, the Learning Center was ready for its official opening. The timing presented challenges. May was still adjusting to her new home, new country, new family. Disrupting her routine for a public event seemed potentially overwhelming. We could skip the ceremony, I suggested to Jessica. Ethan can handle it. Jessica considered this. Let's ask May what she wants. She's observant enough to make her own choice. We explained the situation simply, that the building I'd been working on was having a special day, but that she didn't need to attend if she preferred to stay home. May thought carefully, then asked, Is this building important to you? Yes, I answered honestly. Very important. Then I want to see it, she decided. The day of the opening, we arrived early, allowing May to explore the empty building before crowds arrived. She moved through the spaces with natural understanding, gravitating toward the quiet reading corners and art studios. It feels right, she said simply. High praise from our thoughtful daughter. Diana arrived shortly after, visibly nervous about meeting May. I had prepared May with simple facts. That Diana was my mother, that relationships could sometimes be complicated but still important. What I hadn't prepared for was May's direct question when introduced. Were you good at seeing Eliza when she was little like me? Diana looked startled. then genuinely remorseful. No, she answered honestly. I wasn't. But I'm learning to see better now. The honesty seemed to satisfy May, who nodded and then asked Diana to show her the curriculum materials she'd developed. Watching them walk together through the education spaces, Diana pointing out features, May asking perceptive questions, I felt a complex emotion that took me a moment to identify: hope. Not that Diana would suddenly transform into a different person, but that patterns could indeed be interrupted, that new connections could form where old ones had faltered. Ethan arrived with his new fiancée, Sarah, a practical, straightforward woman who seemed to balance his networking tendencies with grounding pragmatism. This place is extraordinary, she said, examining the architectural details. Your father's vision and your execution. It's a powerful combination. The opening ceremony was simple but meaningful. As primary donor and project leader, I was expected to speak. Standing at the podium, I looked out at the assembled guests. Jessica and May in the front row, Diana and Ethan nearby, community partners and educators throughout the audience. My father taught me that architecture isn't just about buildings, I began. It's about creating spaces that allow people to become their fullest selves. This center embodies that philosophy, recognizing that we don't all think, learn, or create in the same ways, and that those differences enrich our community rather than diminishing it. I gestured to the building around us. Every aspect of this design considers different needs: for quiet, for movement, for connection, for independence. It represents what's possible when we truly see each other and design our world accordingly. My gaze found May, watching me with intense focus. The greatest gift we can offer each other is to be truly seen, not as we wish others to be, but as they actually are. My father gave me that gift. This center extends it to future generations. After the ceremony, as guests toured the facility, Jessica found me in Dad's favorite design element, a circular seating area with a domed skylight that created ever-changing patterns of light throughout the day. That was beautiful, she said. And absolutely true. May joined us, sitting quietly between us and looking up at the play of light above. Grandfather made this part? She asked. He designed it, I clarified. Other people built it after he was gone. She considered this. So his ideas keep working even though he isn't here. The profound simplicity of her observation caught me off guard. Yes. Exactly that, she nodded, satisfied with her understanding. Like how you see me because he saw you, even though I never met him. Jessica and I exchanged glances over her head, both recognizing the wisdom in her words. Later that evening, as we prepared dinner in our kitchen, now adapted to include a step stool for May to participate, Diana called. The center is remarkable, she said without preamble, even better than Michael's original concept. Coming from Diana, this was extraordinary praise. Thank you, I replied. Your curriculum contributions made it stronger. She was quiet for a moment. May is remarkable too. Perceptive, like you were. Another acknowledgement that would have once seemed impossible. Yes, she is. She asked me a difficult question today, Diana continued. About seeing you clearly when you were young. I heard, I said carefully. Your answer was honest. It made me think about what I missed, she admitted. All those years focused on who I wanted you to be rather than who you actually were. The regret in her voice sounded genuine. We're building something better now, I offered. All of us, in different ways. After we hung up, I found May in her creative space, working intently on a drawing. What are you making? I asked, careful not to intrude too much on her concentration. She showed me a carefully rendered scene, our family standing in front of the learning center. The detail was impressive for a child her age, but what struck me most was how she'd captured each person's essence. Jessica's confident stance, my thoughtful expression, her own observant posture. This is beautiful, I said, meaning it completely. You've really seen each of us. She nodded seriously. That's the most important part of drawing. Looking really hard at what's actually there, not what you think should be there. The wisdom in her statement, so aligned with Dad's philosophy and my own hard-won understanding, took my breath away. Where did you learn that? I asked. She shrugged. I just know it. Some wisdom, it seemed, didn't need to be taught. Some people naturally understood the importance of seeing clearly, even from childhood. Dad had been such a person. So apparently was May. That night, after May was asleep, Jessica and I sat in the garden Dad had inspired. "I keep thinking about what May said today," Jessica reflected. "About your father's ideas continuing to work even after he's gone." "It's true in ways I never anticipated," I agreed. "Not just the building or the trust, but the understanding he passed to you, that you're now passing to May. And the healing with Diana and Ethan," I added. "That came from his foresight too, in its way." Jessica nodded. "Creating space for growth, even in relationships that seemed broken. That's a powerful legacy." I touched the architect's compass I still wore around my neck. He always said good design considers future adaptations. I think he applied that principle to everything. Buildings, relationships, family dynamics. "He would be proud of the adaptations you've made," Jessica said softly. Looking at our home, at the learning center visible through the trees, at the evidence of May's presence in the toys carefully arranged on the patio, I felt the truth of a lesson that had taken me years to fully understand. The greatest inheritance isn't what's given to you. It's what you build with it. Dad had given me tools, both literal and metaphorical. He'd provided a foundation. But the structures rising from that foundation reflected choices I'd made, partnerships I'd formed, adaptations to circumstances he could never have foreseen. There was profound freedom in that realization. I used to think I needed to follow Dad's blueprint exactly, I confessed, to honor his intentions perfectly. Now I see that the true honor is in building something he couldn't have imagined. Something uniquely ours. Jessica squeezed my hand. That's the gift of a strong foundation. It supports whatever you're brave enough to create. In the quiet garden, under stars my father had considered when designing the skylights, I felt a completion of a circle and the beginning of new ones. If you've ever been misunderstood by those who should have known you best, this story is for you. If you've struggled to break patterns that no longer serve you, to build something new from complicated beginnings, know that it's possible. The blueprints of your life aren't fixed. They can be modified, expanded, reimagined. The people who truly see you, whether they're family by birth or by choice, those are the ones who help you build something authentic and lasting. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can offer the next generation is to see them clearly, without the distortions of your own expectations or history. Build carefully. Build thoughtfully. But most importantly, build true to your own vision. The structure that results will shelter not just you, but everyone who needs the unique space only you can create. 5 years passed like turning pages in a well-crafted book, each chapter distinct, yet flowing naturally into the next. The Learning Center flourished beyond our expectations, becoming a model that educational institutions across the country began to study and replicate. Diana's curriculum design received national recognition, giving her a renewed sense of purpose and professional identity that softened some of her sharper edges. May, now 11, had blossomed from a cautious, observant child into a confident young artist with a gift for capturing emotional truths in her work. Her quiet strength reminded me daily of the power in seeing deeply rather than merely looking. Horizon Technologies had continued its successful expansion under Jessica's leadership, with our partnership remaining strong both professionally and personally. It was during this period of relative stability that an unexpected email arrived in my inbox. The sender's name, Lawrence Peterson, meant nothing to me initially, but the subject line caught my attention. Your mother's interview and your work at the Learning Center. The message was brief but intriguing. Ms. Chen, I recently interviewed your mother, Diana, for a feature on innovative educational spaces. She spoke at length about your Learning Center and mentioned something that surprised me, that the center's design was partially inspired by your own childhood experiences. As someone documenting educational innovations, I'd value your perspective. Would you consider meeting to discuss this further? I stared at the screen, processing several surprises at once. Diana had given an interview about the Learning Center. She had connected its design to my childhood. And she had done so publicly. To a journalist? It seemed so unlike the Diana I had known for most of my life. The woman who had consistently overlooked my achievements and dismissed my challenges. I called Diana immediately. I received an email from someone named Lawrence Peterson. I began without preamble. He says he interviewed you about the Learning Center. Diana sounded uncharacteristically hesitant. Yes, he's writing a book about educational spaces that address neurodiversity. He contacted me through the Curriculum Development Network. He mentioned that you talked about my childhood, I said carefully. About how it influenced the center's design. Diana was quiet for a moment. I hope that wasn't overstepping. It seemed relevant to explaining the philosophy behind the spaces. The lack of defensiveness in her tone was striking. 5 years ago, Diana would have bristled at any suggestion she had spoken out of turn. Now she seemed genuinely concerned about respecting boundaries. What exactly did you tell him? I asked. The truth, she said simply. That I missed what was right in front of me for years. A child who processed the world differently, who needed spaces that supported her way of thinking, rather than forcing her to adapt to environments that overwhelmed her. That your father saw what I didn't, and that the center's design reflects that understanding. I sat down, genuinely stunned by her candor. You said all that to a stranger? For publication? It's time I owned my mistakes, Diana replied with unexpected firmness, and acknowledged your vision. The center is changing children's lives, Eliza. That deserves to be documented properly, with the full context of how it came to be. After our call, I agreed to meet with Lawrence. His book project had expanded from merely documenting innovative spaces to exploring the personal stories behind them, the why behind the design choices, not just the what. Our conversation lasted hours, touching on aspects of my childhood I had rarely discussed publicly. I spoke about being the quiet child in a family that valued sociability, about creating small private spaces in our home where I could think without sensory overload, about Dad's recognition of my needs, and his subtle design adaptations to our family home that made my world more navigable. And now you've created that understanding for other children, Lawrence observed. You've transformed personal challenge into structural opportunity. Not just me, I clarified. This has been a family journey, in complicated ways. My mother's curriculum design brings her educational expertise to the spaces my father conceptualized and I implemented. Lawrence seemed particularly interested in this aspect, the healing of family dynamics through shared purpose. Would you and your mother consider a joint interview? He asked. That perspective, how multi-generational understanding evolves, would add significant depth to the book. The old Eliza would have rejected the idea immediately, unwilling to share vulnerable space with someone who had so often diminished her. But time and accomplishment had given me security that defensiveness once poorly substituted for. I'll discuss it with her, I said. To my surprise, Diana agreed readily. It might be good for both of us, she said, and perhaps helpful for other families struggling with similar patterns. The joint interview was scheduled for the following month at the Learning Center itself, allowing Lawrence to photograph the spaces we discussed. As that day approached, I found myself unexpectedly anxious. Despite our improved relationship, Diana and I had never publicly discussed the more painful aspects of our history. Jessica noticed my tension the night before the interview. What are you afraid might happen? She asked as we prepared dinner. I considered the question carefully. That will present a neater narrative than the truth. That will gloss over the difficult parts to appear more evolved than we actually are. Jessica nodded. That would be easier, certainly, but not as valuable to the families who might read this book. Exactly. Real healing isn't linear or complete. It's messy and ongoing. Jessica handed me a vegetable to chop. So be honest about the messiness. That's what makes your story authentic and truly helpful to others. May, setting the table nearby, added her perspective. Like in my art class when Ms. Rivera says perfect drawings aren't interesting. It's the wobbly lines that make people look twice. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying goes. She was right, of course. Perfectly resolved narratives rarely reflect lived experience or inspire genuine connection. The morning of the interview, I arrived early to center myself in the space that had become both professional achievement and personal healing ground. Diana arrived precisely on time, dressed with her usual care but wearing an expression of uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I couldn't sleep last night," she admitted, as we waited for Lawrence. "Thinking about all this." She gestured vaguely around us. "About what might have been different if I'd seen more clearly years ago." It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement she'd ever made of her role in our difficult history. "We can only work with where we are now," I said, echoing something Dad used to say about architectural challenges. Diana nodded. "Your father always believed that, didn't he? That you could solve problems moving forward without dwelling on past mistakes. As long as you learned from them," I added. That was the key part. The learning. Lawrence arrived with his photographer, and we settled into the circular seating area with the skylight, Dad's special design element that had become the heart of the center. The interview began with straightforward questions about the center's conception and development. Then Lawrence steered toward more personal territory. "Diana, you mentioned previously that you missed seeing certain aspects of Eliza's needs as a child. Could you elaborate on that realization?" I held my breath, unsure how Diana would respond to such direct questioning. She straightened slightly, then surprised me with her candor. "I had a very specific idea of success," she began. "Social, verbal, visibly achieving." Eliza was quiet, thoughtful, processed things internally. I mistook that for disengagement or lack of ambition. She glanced at me briefly. I favored her brother, whose style matched my expectations better. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's the truth. I missed seeing her strengths because they didn't present in ways I was looking for. Lawrence nodded encouragingly. "And Eliza, how did that affect you growing up?" This was the moment where we could fall into rehearsed platitudes, smooth over the rough edges of truth. I remembered Jessica's words from the night before and chose authenticity instead. "It taught me to doubt my own perceptions," I said honestly. "To question my worth when it wasn't externally validated." My father provided some balance. He saw value in my way of processing the world. But there were years when I believed something was fundamentally wrong with me. Diana flinched slightly but didn't interrupt. "The irony is that those same traits, deep observation, careful analysis, attention to detail, became my greatest professional strengths. The qualities that were once dismissed as too serious or not engaging enough are exactly what made me effective at creating spaces like this center." Lawrence turned back to Diana. "When did your perspective begin to shift?" Diana considered the question carefully. There wasn't one dramatic moment of revelation. It was gradual. Accelerated after my husband's passing, when Eliza demonstrated capabilities I'd never fully acknowledged. She paused, then continued with remarkable honesty. And I had to face that I'd been wrong. Not just slightly mistaken, but fundamentally wrong in how I'd assessed my own daughter. That's not an easy truth to accept, particularly late in life. "And yet you're now collaborating on this center," Lawrence observed. "You've developed curriculum specifically for these spaces." Diana nodded. "Life offers second chances if you're willing to set aside pride. I had educational training that could contribute meaningfully here. It would have been foolish to withhold that because I was embarrassed by past mistakes." The conversation flowed from there. More natural than I had feared, more honest than I had dared hope. We discussed how the center's design reflected lessons from our family journey, spaces that honored different ways of being without hierarchy, opportunities for both connection and retreat, validation of multiple forms of expression. "What would you want other parents to understand?" Lawrence asked as our time drew to a close. Diana and I exchanged glances, silently negotiating who should answer. She nodded slightly, deferring to me. "That there's no single correct way to think, learn, or interact with the world," I said. "That a child who processes differently isn't broken or deficient. They're simply navigating with a different set of tools. Our job isn't to fix them, but to create environments where their natural strengths can flourish, Diana added, and that it's never too late to see more clearly, to adjust your perspective, to repair what can be repaired. The photographer captured one final image, Diana and me in the center's art studio, where elements of both our contributions were visible in the thoughtful design and curriculum materials. As we walked Lawrence out, he commented, "What you've created here goes beyond architecture or education. It's a physical manifestation of reconciliation." The observation lingered with me long after he departed. Was that what we'd built? Not just a learning center, but a tangible representation of healing? That evening, I recounted the interview to Jessica and May over dinner. It was surprisingly cathartic, I admitted, naming the difficult parts aloud, together, without either of us becoming defensive. Jessica smiled. Public accountability can be powerful. Saying things in front of witnesses makes them more real somehow. May, always perceptive, asked, "Is Grandma Diana different now because she changed her mind, or because you changed yours?" The question caught me off guard with its insight. "Both, I think," I replied carefully. "She's more willing to acknowledge her mistakes, and I'm more secure in my worth, less dependent on her validation." Like parallel lines that finally found a way to intersect, May suggested, demonstrating both her artistic thinking and her advanced understanding of geometry. Jessica and I exchanged impressed glances over her head. "That's a beautiful metaphor," I told her, "and very accurate." May nodded, satisfied with her contribution, and returned to her dinner. These moments, when her quiet observation crystallized into unexpected wisdom, reminded me so much of my own childhood thoughts that often went unexpressed. The difference was that May's insights were welcomed, validated, incorporated into our family conversation. She was growing up being truly seen, not despite her thoughtful nature, but because of it. 2 weeks after the interview, Lawrence sent us preview copies of the chapter featuring the Learning Center. Reading our story through his lens was illuminating. He had captured the complexity without simplification, honoring both the progress made and the work still ongoing. Diana called after receiving her copy. "He did us justice," she said simply. "It's not flattering to me in parts, but it's fair. Truth rarely fits into neat categories of flattering or unflattering," I replied. "It's just truth. Your father used to say something similar about design," she noted. "Don't make it pretty, make it right." The accurate recall of Dad's philosophy surprised me. I hadn't realized she'd absorbed his perspective so completely. "I've been thinking," Diana continued, "about expanding the curriculum for older students, teenagers who might have fallen through the cracks in traditional settings." This was new territory. Diana voluntarily extending her involvement rather than fulfilling obligations. "That would be valuable," I encouraged. "Your experience with secondary education would be particularly relevant." As Diana outlined her ideas, I realized we were having our first truly collaborative conversation, not as mother and daughter with our complicated history, but as two professionals with complementary expertise. It was, in its way, as healing as any explicit apology could have been. The book was published 6 months later to significant attention in educational and architectural circles. The Learning Center began receiving visitors from across the country, educators, designers, and parents, seeking to understand how environment shapes learning experiences. May, now approaching 12, took particular pride in giving tours to visiting children, explaining the design elements from a user's perspective. "This alcove is my favorite," she would tell them, showing off a small reading nook with adjustable lighting. "You can make it exactly as bright or quiet as you need. No one tells you you're being too sensitive." Her advocacy for the space and for the philosophy behind it moved me deeply. She had internalized the core message, that differences in processing weren't deficiencies to overcome, but variations to accommodate and even celebrate. It was everything I had hoped the center would represent. One particularly meaningful visit came from a mother and her 9-year-old daughter. The girl moved through the space with cautious wonder, testing features, discovering possibilities. Her mother approached me after the tour, visibly emotional. "I've been told for years that my daughter needs to change, to speak up more, to come out of her shell," she confided. "This is the first place I've seen that makes me think maybe the shell isn't the problem." Maybe it's the environments that demand she abandon it. I recognized in her words my own mother's former perspective and the transformative potential of seeing differently. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.